Perfect. Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. I'm David DeWitt. I work for the Oregon Wine Board, and I'm our trade relations manager. I'm going to turn it over to Bree here in a second, but just wanted to introduce myself and thank everybody for showing up today. This is the second of 4 webinars that we're hosting on behalf of Oregon Wine Month, which we celebrate every May. And it's just a way for us to spread the word, to connect with consumers and trade, to sell wine, and to do some education in the spirit of connecting with consumers and getting Oregon wine in the glass. Bree, can we go to the next slide, please?
In theory, yes. There we go.
Here we go. So everybody's devices should be muted. We will be monitoring the Q&A, and I believe the chat might be active as well. Please feel free to shoot in questions. We like to answer those as we go, and we're here to answer anything you got. This will be recorded, as you know, and we'll post it up on our trade events page, as well as our Oregon Wine Month Toolkit page. And maybe here in a little bit, I'll drop a link into the toolkit as well. But yeah, so it's available for you to review, to share out, and all 4 of them will be recorded and made public. Last week we did, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, we did sparkling wine, which was great, kind of timely too with Easter and some of the other holidays going on. Today, we are going to be going over regional whites, which is also timely as we're slowly creeping into spring here in Oregon. And when I say slowly, I'm not kidding. And then, yeah, we'll have 2 more webinars later this spring, actually in May, so in Wine Month, which we're looking forward to having, and encourage you guys to register if you haven't already done so. With that, again, thank you everybody for joining. Bree, please take it away.
Thanks, David. Thank you everyone for joining. As David mentioned, we are going to be jumping around the state talking about white wines. White wine in Oregon for me holds a very special place in my heart. I think it's one of the real stars, shining stars here in Oregon. I do think that it's a really, really unique area for growing white wines. And while we, I certainly focused on reds and have many more red varieties, there are, or more plantings of red varieties. I feel like the whites are really under appreciated. So we definitely drink a lot of them here, but hopefully there'll be more of them around the country and internationally in future years as well. And yeah, please everyone, type in the chat and Q&A, say hi to everyone. Let us know where you're here from, where you're joining from, and put any questions that you do have for me in the chat as we go through here. So let's jump into the presentation. Okay, Oregon, that large state that's wedged in between Washington and California. We are up against the Pacific Ocean, so we have a really strong oceanic imprint happening on most of our regions. We are a growing great growing state for wine production as well, with more than 23 AVAs now in Oregon. We're really, hitting over 60 years in wine growing and grape growing quality production here after the prohibition time. And so we're really starting to carve out our very special named places or terroir places, and they're given typically uniform, land scale names to them. So whether it's Dundee Hills or Tualatin Hills, whether they're shaped around water sources or specific soil types, as is the Rocks District of Milton Freewater. As we're coming into the 2nd and 3rd generations of Vigneron here in Oregon, we're really starting to hone in on our real specialties within each AVA. So really starting to refine what we do best in each area, and really starting to explore really what's possible in this really amazing wine growing state. One of the reasons why this state is growing is we're starting to see wine growth everywhere along, especially the water systems, or whether it's the Columbia River Valley in the north, just going back there to that state, Columbia River Valley there in the north, separating Washington and Oregon, or the Pacific Ocean, or the Willamette Valley, or Rogue River, or Umpqua River. We're really starting to see a lot more expansion into vineyards in these areas. So growth happening pretty much everywhere around the state. Walla Walla has seen some of the largest increases in growth, along with the Willamette Valley and the Umpqua Valley as well. So as I did mention, Pinot Noir and red varieties do dominate Oregon's major plantings, but that's not to say that we don't have, well, 69 other grape varieties, and probably more by now, because there's always someone planting something new just as it gets released from a nursery. And so there's a lot of just real innovation and experimentation happening here in Oregon, as winemakers and wine growers from all over the world are starting to really seek out the beauty of this growing region. It has an abundance of water, an abundance of really lovely wind conditions that help to make it a really organic growing area in terms of how we can farm here and the quality of life. So we are going to focus on the whites today. So Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Albarino, Riesling, Chenin Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc, everything's in growth, and there's certainly dozens of varieties that I haven't touched on, but I tried to keep it to varieties that are planted all over the state. So making it a discussion about how they differ in each region and what flavor profiles you can really expect to come from each individual region around Oregon for these specific grape varieties. But touching on first, what makes grape growing in Oregon so ideal for great wine, not just for red wine, but for white wine as well. It's a combination of factors. Definitely the soils come into play. We have some really deep marine sedimentary alluvial soils. We have clay volcanic soils that are very intense and help to keep in the water systems. And then we also have stream sediments, because Oregon has really been carved by a lot of moving river systems. And so we do have a lot of alluvial river banks and stream sediments that are present in a lot of our AVAs. The other combination, which is important, is our latitude and our daylight length. So we have really long, warm, sunny days and cool nights. So that diurnal temperature drop happens in every region in Oregon, and it's more pronounced in certain regions than in others, but we do really see a vast diurnal temperature shift, which really helps to give us the freshness and fruit purity and high acidity retained in all of our wines. So that northerly latitude helps give us that long extended daylight, and then the cooling influences that come from the Pacific Ocean and are really wind influences that meander down a lot of our valleys along river systems and are impacted by the steepness of our slopes and cool air pooling off of our mountain ranges. So all of that makes up for really food-friendly wine with great acidity, great structure, and great aging potential. The other thing is that we are a region that has a lot of estate-owned and small estate-owned grower winemakers. So our vignerons and winemakers are spending so much time actually in the vineyards with their crop, understanding their fruit and really nurturing it into the best fruit quality that it can be, and picking at it at just the perfect time. The other thing is that we have a huge amount of biodiversity still in our regions. So none of our regions are a monoculture of the vine yet. We still have a lot of mixed farming and a lot of forests and a lot of animal biodiversity as well. So really important for the health of our vines and also to keep the health of our community and our vines as well. So you can see there's that vineyard with the forest surrounding it, which is a pretty common vineyard site. And then along the valley floors, you can see generally how steep our vineyards are as well. And then down on the valley floors, we don't typically plant a lot of grapes on a lot of the valley floors. They're more reserved for crops like orchard fruits, hazelnuts, or as we call them in Oregon, filberts, and then of course grass seed and nursery plants as well. So lots of agriculture still happening in Oregon. So we're very aware of our growing conditions and taking care of our surroundings. So touching on the soil aspect, we have, ancient soils, not as ancient as some regions, but we do have ancient marine sedimentary uplifts and bedrock ancient marine sediment uplifts that are really present in the Willamette Valley. When the tectonic plates came together, they raised up out of the sea, which Oregon was under, these beautiful marine sediments, and they make up a number of AVAs in the Willamette Valley itself. And then as you start to move south into southern Oregon's AVA, we have these really ancient bedrock marine sediments that are almost sandstone-like in their appearance and their free draining ability. So much more ancient marine sediments as we move south into the Umpqua Valley AVA and then into the Rogue Valley. This is really important for keeping that drainage happening, but also allowing the vine roots to go very, very deep into the soils here. Then came all of the volcanic eruptions and the mountain ranges that really left a lot of basalt lava flows in the North Willamette and the Columbia Valley, Columbia Gorge, and Walla Walla Valley AVAs. So these lava basalt flows came from the series of cascade mountains that exploded, erupted during this time, leaving massive lava flows to run down to the north part of the Willamette Valley, where they sort of peter out after about Eola Amity Hills and just south of Salem. So that's why the North Willamette Valley, you'll find very distinctive types of wines from 2 specific or 3 specific soil types: marine sediments, volcanic basalts, and then the Ice Age Missoula flood soils as well, but the loess that came from the degradation of these basalt lava flows and the scraping of the ice flows that came through the Columbia Valley and the Columbia River system and blew down into the top of the North Willamette Valley, covering the Chehalem Mountains and Tualatin Hills AVAs with these very fine talc powder-like, free draining, fast draining, low soils. They are very good for being fast draining, but they also help to retain some water during the wet season as well, and really slow release that during the summer, as our summers dry out quite quickly in June and July. So that slow release of water really helping to nurture the vines through the summer period and that growing season. And also they're very important for reducing the spread of phylloxera and allowing us to have some of the oldest vines still in the Willamette Valley in these Laurelwood and Tualatin Hills AVAs. So three distinct soil types. Those low soils and volcanic lava eruption soils are really present also along the Columbia River Gorge, which is what you can see in that picture down on the left. That is really coated in those fast draining low soils, and that spreads from the Columbia Gorge. Even though there's a bedrock of basalt underneath, it spreads east out through the Columbia Valley AVA and into the Walla Walla AVA, where these low soils are incredibly deep. And it's a combination of riverbed soils and low soils that are really impacting the wine styles that are grown in the Rocks District, the Milton Free Water District, and the Walla Walla Valley in Eastern Oregon. Columbia Valley and Walla Walla Valley, of course, are our shared AVAs with Washington State. So then again, moving into the whole combination of what makes this such a great place to grow premium grapes is, again, the fact that we are really formed by rivers and mountain ranges. And as we learn in all of our wine studies, we know the importance of having moving water systems and moderating water systems that can help prevent frost and also help to moderate the climate and cool it down, bringing it away from extremes in temperature. And that really makes for a really even ripening period that can happen throughout the majority of our growing regions. Obviously, it's cooler in the north as we are moving northern in latitude, and warmer in the south as we get in, closer to California and the California border. But those river systems, the Columbia River, the US's fourth largest river system, is incredibly important for irrigation that's required in the Columbia Valley AVA and Walla Walla Valley AVA and much of the Gorge AVA as well. So that river system provides a lot of irrigation for Washington and Oregon, helping the vines to survive during the hot summers, which are much more extreme here than they are, say, in the Willamette Valley. This area also helps to provide really intense winds, which can sometimes be a little too intense, much like the Mistral of France. The river will create that suction out to the Pacific Ocean or in from the Pacific Ocean, but really creating wind temperatures that are in excess of 80 miles an hour. They're incredibly fast, and they can shut down the vines and delay ripening here, which can be a really good thing to help protract that growing season again and let flavor development catch up with sugar development as well. Moving south into the Willamette Valley AVA. So the Willamette Valley AVA is bordered by that Columbia River in the north and travels from Portland, south of Salem, just past the town of Eugene. So quite a large AVA. It's 3.5 million acres in size. And it really is dominated by hillside vineyards. So really benefiting from those foothill vineyards on the Cascade Range and Coast Range. That said, the majority of vineyards are located on that westerly Coast Range side, where they're huddled up against the hills, being protected from the rainfall that comes in off the Pacific Ocean and really benefiting from east-facing slopes that will take the morning sunlight from that eastern Cascade Range area. Moving down into Southern Oregon AVAs, you have the Umpqua Valley AVA and the Umpqua River, which moves through Elkton and out to the sea and down to the town of Roseburg. And that river is very important again for irrigation. And this is where we really start to move into a territory of getting into warmer, drier areas. So the Umpqua Valley has 1 foot, especially in the northern side, in the Willamette Valley's more maritime climate. And then the rest is very Mediterranean and can get very dry and cool. However, the benefit of being in the Umpqua Valley is that the elevations of vineyards here are quite high. And what that means for vineyard development and vineyard characteristics is that during the hot summers, so you will often get 90 plus, 100, early 100 plus degrees temperatures here, but during the evenings they will drop down to as low as 50 and sometimes even lower. So a drastic diurnal temperature shift that really is created by these river and mountain systems. And again, that cool air that really funnels from the Pacific Ocean over the mountain ranges and into the steep vineyards that cool down those vineyard areas, really help to preserve the acidity and the freshness of the fruit and the grapes, allowing the vines at night a chance to relax, recuperate, and restore their water reserves as well. Down in the Rogue River, they are bordered to the west by the Siskiyou Mountains, and the Applegate River and Rogue River are both dominant river systems in this landscape. So very meandering out to the sea again. And this is where these river systems have really moved quite a bit. So much of the Rogue River, much of the Rogue Valley AVA, and especially the Applegate Valley AVA, are really alluvial river systems that are very free draining. They can be quite nutrient poor, but they're ideal for this shorter growing season where the vines need the soil to warm up, and the rocky, sandy soils down here are really warming up quite early on to get those vines alive and producing during the warm climate, the hot days down here. And again, a lot of these vineyards in the Rogue Valley are at 2,000 feet elevation. So they're quite high. 1,600 feet is, the average, but quite high. And again, that really promotes a very large diurnal temperature shift. And what that means down here, because you have the hotter days as well, you get these thicker skins on grapes, more structured wines, and vibrant, juicy acidities that really help to retain the acidity, but also the fresh fruit flavors in the wines. So you get more full-bodied wine styles, but with very fresh, crisp fruit flavors. And of course, it's a beautiful area to visit, as most of Oregon is, but very dramatic in terms of what we see from vineyards there. Very close proximity to all the mountains and rivers in that area. And then sunshine in Oregon. So latitude is a huge factor for allowing Oregon to grow premium fine wine grapes. So it really is because of our latitude that in the winter, we are receiving more than 15 hours a day of prime growing sunlight. And so we all know that the heat is not the only equation in ripening a high quality wine grape. You also need UV light. And the fact that the UV light here in Oregon is at such a dramatically steep angle, it means that it's not as severe and as hot as in other parts of the country. And so this allows us to both still open the canopy and the fruit zone, de-leafing in the fruit zone, without allowing sunburn to happen. And that sunlight getting into the grapes and into the fruit zone helps to prevent rot, but also really helps to thicken the skins and degrade any green flavors that we would see in these grapes. So really lovely ripe wines at lower alcohols because of this latitudinal shift and the gentle sunshine. So being in Oregon, we get about 2 hours more sunshine during the growing season than, say, Napa Valley does. And then the other unique situation that we have here is really that we have a very sharp Mediterranean climate, very dry during the summer. So unlike Burgundy and other parts of Europe that see rainfall throughout the growing season, Oregon is incredibly lucky to receive a very dry growing season, which means that we are not spraying our vineyards as often. We don't have as much tractor compaction and the need to be in the vineyard and spraying every 4 to 6 days. We get a really nice reprieve during the growing season, right until harvest, where sprays are really lessened in their need. And so our growth period or our rainfall period is really happening from December through April. And We've definitely been having a lot of rainfall this year, but it is really starting to become mild, and we'll start to see, as you can see on this graph, that the rainfall will lessen, and then during the months of July, August, and most of September, Oregon is very cloud-free, big blue skies, and also rain-free. So again, that allows us to grow quality wine grapes without the fear of having powdery mildew or botrytis developing during that all crucial growing season when the grapes are really trying to ripen and get good sunshine conditions there. And then finally, that fourth factor is that we are a community of small artisan producers. The majority of wineries in Oregon produce less than 5,000 cases. And most vineyards in Oregon are around 20 to 40 acres in size at most, which allows a small team and a family to really be able to manage those vines. We also have been recognized that a lot of the fine wine that is recognized in the country in terms of wine spectator reviews, wine enthusiast reviews, we outpace other regions. While we only produce 1% of the fine wine in the US, our wine spectator scores for 90 plus wines are up in the 25% range. So really being acknowledged that this combination of our unique soils, our hands-on approach to farming, and our unique dry summers and growing seasons are really a key influence in producing fine, high-quality wines, and the fact that we spend so much of our own time in the vineyard itself. So as you can see here, this is just an example of why it's so obvious that we are very connected to our place and to really doing the best for our place and for the people that we work with. And that means limiting any sprays that don't really need to happen and working towards an organic farming system. These beautiful mountains, this is the gorgeous Vermentino grape down at Troon Vineyard in the Applegate Valley, but you can see the proximity of the wildlands in Oregon. It's ever present around you, and therefore all of those wildlands are still biodiversity pathways. So we still have a lot of animal life coming through our vineyards. So biodynamics and regenerative farming in Oregon is really thriving. We're seeing an increase every single year in these farming practices. You have someone there filling a cow's horn with biodynamic prep. And then Oregon actually accounts for nearly 52% of the certified biodynamic acreage in the US. And that's a very good number considering how present we are in the US in terms of actual vineyard production. That we have some of the largest vineyards. So King Estate is one of the largest biodynamic certified producers in the US and was one of the first in Oregon to go ahead with biodynamic certification. And there's really biodynamic certified and organic certified producers all over the state. Our sustainable certified organization, Live, which is low input viticulture and enology, about 47% of producers are in that Live certification, sustainable certification process. And Live continues to move towards where growers want to be, which is often increasing their biodiversity. So adding animals in the vineyard, as you can see the sheep in this vineyard here. And that's something that regenerative organic farming certification also ensures as well. So regenerative organic farming, Troon Vineyard in the Applegate Valley was one of the first vineyards and the first in Oregon to be certified as a regenerative organic farm. And that means that they have to have a portion of animal husbandry on the farm as well, and animals in the vineyard. It's also one of the first certification that really includes the requirements for health of staff as well. So really taking stock of the whole ecosystem to get these additional certifications in place. There's one question coming up in the chat here. Is the 52% number, it's only for vineyards. 52% number is for biodynamic acreage for grapes that we've listed there. Good question. Okay, let's jump into these grape varieties. So Pinot Gris, and I'm going to include Riesling here as well, because Pinot Gris and Riesling were really the first two grape varieties that, white varieties that Oregon really built its name around. Oregon was the first region in the US to commercialize Pinot Gris as a white wine, and really spent a lot of time developing the education around what Pinot Gris is. And so we do have many styles of Pinot Gris here in the US now, or in Oregon. And so it has moved from being a sort of more rich and luscious style with, you know, lots of baked fruit characters, baked pear and orchard fruit flavors in the Willamette Valley, to something that's now much leaner and juicy and more crisp. And also styles that are seeing the use of the Pinot Gris skins. Being that Pinot Gris is a mutation of Pinot Noir, it actually does have purple skins. So you can pull a lot of color out of those skins, especially when you do open up the canopy and let that UV light in and build the anthocyanins and the color in the Pinot Gris skins. So there's now a number of producers, particularly in the Willamette Valley and Columbia Gorge, that are making skin contact Pinot Gris as well, and making a Ramato style or light red style from the variety. In Southern Oregon, still the most planted grape variety in every single AVA. I was still a little shocked to see that Pinot Gris is still the most dominant grape variety in all AVAs around the state for white wines, apart from Milton Freewater. So really, Southern Oregon is still seeing plantings of Pinot Gris happening, although in the Willamette Valley, we haven't really seen continued plantings of Pinot Gris. Willamette Valley is starting to move into more Chardonnay and other varieties, and less so on Pinot Gris. But down in the Umpqua Valley and Southern and Rogue Valley AVAs, there's still plantings of Pinot Gris happening. And those wines tend to be very crisp, very high acid, much more green and yellow apple, nashi pears, orchard fruit styles of wines. So here's a couple of images. And a lot of the acreage of Pinot Gris that does go into, that is grown in the Umpqua Valley and and the Rogue Valley AVA, actually does go into Oregon appellated wines, like those that you'll see from Acrobat in those cans, or to A to Z or Union as well. Prevalence of Pinot Blanc, it is declining. We don't really see any more plantings of Pinot Blanc. And although it was one of the styles that was the grapes that was originally planted, to my knowledge, there's really no more of it being planted. And many of those that were originally planted are being torn out. That said, there's some really beautiful old vine vineyards of Pinot Blanc as well. But as it comes into, you know, a specific varietal labeling style, they tend to be included more in a white blend. And there's really not too many people using Pinot Blanc as a single varietal wine anymore. So definitely on the decline, but some small producers who are using it, and also some that are, I think, labeling as Auxerrois as well. Yeah, Gewürztraminer is good too. And again, sadly being torn out along with Riesling as well. So I might take a moment just to touch on Riesling now as well, because it now makes up less than 1% of the white grape plantings in Oregon as well, and suffers a little bit the same fate as Pinot Gris is, especially in the Willamette Valley, where you do need to still do a lot of education about the style of Riesling. But for those in the know, there are some beautiful old vine Riesling vineyards in the McMinnville and Eola Amity Hills AVAs and Yamhill Carlton AVAs that make incredibly distinctive styles of Riesling. And the one thing that I think is really special about Riesling in the Willamette Valley is that because of it being such a late ripening variety, it does get the benefit of having a long growing season where you can really build those flavor profiles. And you can also farm it for botrytis as well. So really building in some complexity into Riesling can be a lot of fun in the Willamette Valley with those old vine vineyards. The other thing about white grapes that we mentioned earlier was that they, having that great UV exposure and also the wind exposure really thickens the skins of white grapes. And what that means is that you have a strong phenolic character in your wines. And that phenolic character can be really expressive and really interesting, especially for food-friendly wines, that you get a really lovely phenolic bitterness and quinine flavor profile out of. If you are a winemaker that is not afraid to use some of those phenolics in your wine styles instead of just doing a very gentle pressing. And a lot of these grapes like Pinot Gris, like Riesling, like Gewürztraminer, and like Grüne Veltliner, they hold a lot of flavor in their skins. And so in the old world or in Europe, you will generally find that these grapes are not so gently handled. They will have more maceration times on their skins, whether that's just a complexity of how they're being harvested and the age of the winemaking equipment. But it's generally, the US and Australia that are really not taking full advantage of the flavor profile grapes because they are handling them too gently and really just taking the fresh juice and gentle extraction practices a little too far when they could be making much more interesting wines. Speaking of interesting wines, the rise of Oregon Chardonnay is something that's really coming on very strong. I'm sort of surprised to see that the Chardonnay production is still only listed as about 7% of total vineyard growth in all of Oregon. The amount of Chardonnay that I see being planted around the Willamette Valley especially, but also in the Umpqua and the Rogue Valleys and Columbia Valley, tells me that there is going to be a lot of great Oregon Chardonnay really hitting the market in a few years' time. Chardonnay was one of the original varieties that was planted here in the 60s. And it was really, a sort of a complex storm of reasons why it wasn't ideal at the time. So Chardonnay in the 60s, we didn't have clonal selections that would suit the weather landscapes, the climate landscapes of Oregon, and particularly of the Willamette Valley. So the Chardonnay, the clones that were being brought up from California had a lot more disease and in their cluster morphology and so you were getting a lot more complexity. So small hen and chick bunches, so large berries and small berries coming through, and that was really not working quite very well in a very cool growing season, which and 80s really still were in Oregon. So in the 80s, we did have the introduction of the Dijon clones. Dr. Bernard from Dijon, sent out Burgundian clonal selections around the world, where they landed in the Adelaide Hills, in Argentina and Chile, in South Africa, and of course in Oregon. And so what these clonal selections did was they take on sugar accumulation very easily. And so they were able to make a much richer, riper style of Chardonnay than the previous clonal selections. So since the 80s and 90s, we are really, have really expanded the conversation around Chardonnay. The other complicating factor with Chardonnay in the 70s and 80s was that the style of Chardonnay that Americans were drinking was the very ripe, buttery, highly oaked, generous style of Chardonnay. And even the California style, which what it was, that style today has, drastically moved in terms of its style preferences. So now that people are generally looking for leaner, fresher, more mineral and citrus driven styles of Chardonnay, Oregon Chardonnay has really been coming into its own. And it's been quite nice to actually revisit some of these older selections of Chardonnay. The Draper clone of Chardonnay is planted at Eyrie Vineyard, and they will often bring out aged examples of this Chardonnay. And even today, those wines from the 70s are performing just spectacularly well. So unfortunately, it was a little bit of right place, wrong time for Chardonnay in the 60s in Oregon. But now we are having a renaissance, and it is really a fantastic, complex, smoky, flinty, minerally, leaner style of Chardonnay that we're starting to see. So a couple of questions. When were the Dijon clone Chardonnays planted? They weren't introduced until the late 80s, so 1988. So they really didn't get released from the universities until 1990, 1991. So it's really the 90s that Dijon clone Chardonnay started taking off, and that was primarily in the Willamette Valley, but now they're found all over as well. Can I speak to white Pinot Noir? I can, but it's not a white grape. It's just, think about Pinot Noir as champagne, and they're gently pressing it, taking away just the juice, and making it like a Chardonnay, or making it like a Pinot Blanc in stainless steel, or fermenting in oak. So really more of a champagne method when you make white Pinot Noir, not really bringing any of the varietal characteristics into the conversation. I don't know if that answered your question about white Pinot Noir. Okay, I'm having trouble with my mouse. There we go. Okay, so Chardonnay is still only 7%, again, mostly grown in the Willamette Valley. In fact, the Willamette Valley is the majority of production of any real grape variety that's grown at level here. Thanks, David, for popping that in the chat as well. Yeah, great article by James Suckling about his excitement over Oregon Chardonnay, and I would have to agree. So far, we've been consuming a lot of it here, but some people are letting it get out, and so the secret's not safe anymore. And Oregon Chardonnay is definitely taking the place of a lot more expensive and increasingly rarer Burgundian Chardonnay on a lot of great restaurant lists around the nation, and rightly so. The wines are really fantastic. Again, really capturing that freshness of our growing season. So ripe fruit, but citrus and white nectarine, white peach, just ripe orchard fruit flavors, with really elegant acid and well handled and very subtle oak influence, giving just a hint of mineral smokiness to the wines. And really no batonnage is used anymore in Oregon Chardonnay. It's all lees contact and extended lees lees contact to build a creamy, rich mid palate without being excessive and really building it too much. So just a gentle building of the lees on the palates. Question, are Oregon winemakers using a Burgundian style to make Chardonnays, or are we developing our own profile? You know, I think that's still a development question. They have definitely taken from the Burgundian model or the Meursault model, which is to ferment in light, long toasted oak and then keep the wine on its lees for over vintage. So keeping it in barrel for about 10 months and then taking it, all the lees and the juice into stainless steel at about that 10 or 11 month mark and really aging it for another 6 to 8 months just on those lees in a very reductive environment. So removing that oxidative and oak flavor influence on the wines and bringing in that mid-palate building style. I think there's still some who are still figuring it out in terms of, you know, when, you know, what the balance is of fruit and phenolic structure and acidity in the wines. But Burgundian Chardonnay practices have definitely been a huge influence in the style conversation that's moving forward in Oregon Chardonnay. And you can see there's a ton of Burgundians who are now moving to the Willamette Valley, especially, and really making some lovely Chardonnays as well. Although it has to be said that the Burgundians are certainly finding it that Oregon is not Burgundy and has a completely different growing season and profile that gives to the fruit as well. So they too are having to make adaptations, and that's something that's, you know, that collaborative communal nature of Oregon is one where everyone is really sharing their influences and their understandings and what's happening in their Chardonnay production. So I think like with Pinot Noir and other, you know, grape varieties, Chardonnay is really increasing in quality and popularity very swiftly because of the amount of community collaboration that's really happening around the variety. We're definitely excited about it in Oregon, so it's hard not to, you know, talk to everyone and share your wines and share your styles and your secrets of production when you're making it as well. Great question. Oh, and while I'm on Chardonnay, let's not forget Blanc de Blanc, because there are some fantastic Blanc de Blancs being made now as well. Really complex styles, and you know, Argyle is the king of the extended tirage style, but there's now so much sparkling wine that's being made in Oregon, and Blanc de Blancs are definitely increasing. One more question. Oh, Grüne Veltliner, yes, that's a favorite of mine as well, but I didn't include it in this because it's not quite everywhere yet, and I could be here all day if I talk about every single grape variety that we have. But Grüne Veltliner is certainly a favorite of mine as well. And I love the complexity and the unique flavor profile that it has here in Oregon as well. Okay, moving into Viognier. So Viognier is actually grown in every AVA, although it does really thrive in a hot continental climate like the Walla Walla Valley and Rogue Valley, where its high elevations and alluvial soils really help that grape variety retain its freshness and vibrant energy as well. Super food friendly and really great for age worthiness as well. So good to put in the cellar. So Viognier is a thick-skinned grape variety. It's a pretty rich, oily white wine. Although it originated in the Northern Rhone, it's definitely grown in the Mediterranean regions around Oregon. So the Rogue Valley has some of the largest acreage of Viognier in the state and is really excelling in this very unique style. So very full-bodied, fleshy, intense fruit flavors, but again, this remarkable energy and vibrant acidity. And the Rogue Valley winemakers are not overly shy about using some of those phenolics and the glycerol intensity of the grape to combine it in a mix of both stainless steel vessels and neutral oak and lightly oaked styles as well. So creating really complex flavors, anything from mango and peach through to the fresher flavors of honeysuckle and tangerine and more citrus fruit flavors as well. It is grown in the Willamette Valley also, where it tends to be a late ripener. So one of those varieties that ripens like Grüne Veltliner towards the very end of the season and really extends the growing season into late October. So very much more of a crisp orchard fruit profile in the Willamette Valley. And then as you move out through the Columbia Valley and into the Walla Walla AVA and also the Rocks District AVA is where Viognier is actually being planted a lot as well. And that makes sense given that the Rocks District is mainly focused on Syrah and Grenache plantings. And the same with Walla Walla, there's a huge amount of Cabernet and Merlot, but there's also a decent amount of Syrah and Grenache being planted there. And Viognier is being planted in small amounts in vineyards with Syrah and Grenache in the Rocks District so that it can be co-fermented as well as made into a white wine as well. So co-fermentation with Syrah, especially in a region that has quite high pH Syrahs or very broad, rich Syrahs, Viognier can bring some lovely crisp acidity and some phenolic texture and wind back the alcohol level and pH just a little bit in those areas. But they can really make the Syrah, especially in the meaty wines of the Rocks District, it'll really make those berry flavors pop in the Syrahs if a little is co-fermented there as well. Albarino is another great variety that I am seeing a huge amount of interest in. There's more and more plantings happening in the Willamette Valley and in Southern Oregon. And I guess it makes sense because, you know, crisp white wines that similar to Riesling have that really lovely, rich, crisp citrus and stone fruit flavors, but with really lovely salinity and really zesty acidity are really starting to take hold. And this Albarino is, made often in stainless steel. So it can be a really nice early drinking wine style. And also given the fact that, Oregon produces some of the most delicious Dungeness crab, albacore, tuna, clams, oysters. It really is a wine that just goes with everything seafood. Again, it's a pretty phenolic grape variety and holds a lot of flavor in its skins. So when you let it get nice and ripe in Southern Oregon, say in the Umpqua Valley, where you have these lovely high elevations and cooling mountain winds blowing through that can allow the grape variety to hang a little bit longer, but still retaining the acidity, what it gives you is these really quite exotic honeydew and nectarine with ginger spice flavors coming through the wine as well. And so this grape variety is being planted everywhere through Rogue, Umpqua, Willamette Valley, Columbia Gorge, AVA. And actually also in the Walla Walla Valley as well. Are the flavor profiles of Albarino and Pinot Blanc similar? I wouldn't say they're incredibly similar. I would say that Albarino is a lot more similar to Riesling than Pinot Blanc. Pinot Blanc can be very much citrus and green apple, but it struggles to give you much more than that, maybe some white apple blossom florals at best. But Albarino can be a really exotic fruit profile. So if you pick it early on the early side, lower alcohol side, it'll definitely be more like grapefruit, and tangerine and citrus flavors, and green apple flavors, and really ripping acidity that hurts your teeth quite a bit, through to, if you do let it hang a little bit more, get more developed and riper styles, then you will really be able to pull out a lot more of that orchard fruit character, the honeydew melons. And then if you age it in tank on its lees, you're really pulling out a lot more of that salinity that the grape very naturally has. And you often find that in Riesling as well. It's just that Riesling's overt floralness and overt fruit characteristics can sometimes hide some of that salinity. So I would probably say that Albarino is a little more like a shy Riesling than it is like Pinot Blanc. But some really great examples being made. And you can see here, this is a fantastic image of the fault line vineyard at Abasella in the Umpqua Valley. On the left there, you see Earl standing in the vineyard. He's looking at his Tempranillo, but this is also where the Albarino is planted, as this really lovely ribbon-like slope meanders all the way down to the valley floor and down to the Umpqua River down there. And then the other vineyard where we have a lot of Albarino being grown as well, and definitely a lot of Spanish varieties, is just outside of the Columbia Gorge AVA in the Columbia Valley AVA. And this site is, you can see how terraced and layered those vineyards are. This is all low soils, and there's a lot of Spanish varieties and Albarino planted in this vineyard as well at 3 Mile. Okay, Chenin Blanc, the winemakers love a fair grape, I think, or maybe it's the sommeliers love a fair grape. But there's definitely a lot of interest in Chenin Blanc, and people sourcing it from as far as Washington and the Columbia Valley, all the way through the Willamette Valley and Southern Oregon. So slowly more and more being planted of this variety, which really tends to work with the Oregon climate very well, whether you're in a hot, dry region like the Southern Oregon area, especially the Rogue Valley. This will make a full-bodied white wine with lots of yellow and yellow apple and pear flavors, and be a nice medium-bodied style, medium to full-bodied style of white wine. You can barrel age it, barrel ferment it. Neutral oak or just a hint of new oak as well is really beautiful on this variety, and really brings out its nice floral chamomile floral notes to the wine, really exotic. And then if you're working with it in the Willamette Valley or the Columbia Gorge AVA, where we can sometimes be pushing up against the ripening for this grape variety at the end of the season, you can use the botrytis that might develop in late October to really concentrate some of the sugars and bring out more of the quince flavors and ginger spice flavors in Chenin Blanc as well. Again, honey characters coming from botrytis and from aged Chenin Blanc. And you can also, if you like, make this into a beautiful sparkling wine as well. So anything from working with botrytis and not spraying your vineyard as much, to picking the grape on its leaner side and really pushing for an exotic sparkling wine with lots of quince and pear fruit flavors. We're seeing some pet nats coming out of Chenin Blanc as well, which is fun to see. And just a vibrant and delicious fresh fruit mouthful. And then this is a vineyard in the Applegate Valley as well. Again, just showing the proximity of those mountains and all of those wild landscapes that are so common here in Oregon as well. You can see all the oaks as well, and the protected a lot of people are protecting those oak strands so that the biodiversity and the animals can make their way through between the vineyard pathways. Sauvignon Blanc. This is a fun variety in Oregon, and I didn't really appreciate it until I started making Sauvignon Blanc. Okay, let me see. California ruined Chenin Blanc for me. Yes, well, come taste some of the Oregon Chenin Blancs, because they are much more like the Loire Valley, and it makes sense because Loire Valley river system is much more similar to the Willamette Valley and Rogue Valley river systems as well, Columbia Valley river systems. Much more similar Chenin Blanc to the Loire here in Oregon. Sauvignon Blanc, really unique and exotic. Again, coming back to that UV light exposure and really helping to break down some of the ultra green and grassy herbal fruit in Sauvignon Blanc is what happens when you expose the bunches to UV light. And so you can get very rich, ripe styles with lots of tropical guava and passion fruit flavors from a cooler region like the Willamette Valley, because you're able to expose that cluster to fruit, and being that pyrazines, which are present in Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, these can really break down in UV light. So pyrazines are really degraded by the UV light, and that is really what helps to give these more exotic, riper flavors in your Sauvignon Blanc, which is really lovely to see in a cool region. And then in the hotter regions where you're not maybe opening up your fruit zone quite as much, you can shade the fruit clusters with the canopy, and really allow some of those grassy herbal flavors to come through. So this variety is a favorite that's growing amongst all of the AVAs across Oregon, and again making more richer exotic styles from Rogue Valley, especially in the Bear Creek Valley area, where it's more exposed and has really beautiful open wind conditions and very nice dry conditions there to get it really lovely, ripe with gooseberry and grapefruit and white peach flavors, and lots of spice characteristics, through to the Willamette Valley, where in cool years you'll have more honeydew and green passion fruit characters and gooseberry flavors, through to where you can let it hang and develop, break down some of those pyrazines in the skins and in the flavor profile, and really build a rich fruit, white peach, guava, tropical fruited, ripe passion fruit palette as well. However, no matter where you are, Sauvignon Blanc always retains that really etchy, rooty acidity, quite aggressive acidity, but that makes it so favorable to work with across every AVAs, because you can really play with how much ripeness you want to give it, because those acid levels just do not seem to drop in this style. So really lovely white wines, whether you're barrel fermenting them in neutral or lightly new oak vessels, through to stainless steel tank fermentations with some additional lees aging, and also some sparkling versions are out there as well, which is kind of fun and innovative, which Oregon is really all about as well. Took a lot of innovation for those first families who pioneered the industry here to come up here and plant all of these great varieties to see what worked. So here are two different vineyards. The one on the left makes one of my favorite Sauvignon Blancs, a Columbia Valley Sauvignon Blanc called the Gorgeous Savvy, made by, funnily enough, a New Zealand winemaker and an Oregon winemaker as well, but really captures the essence of that beautiful Sauvignon Blanc, and often barrel fermented as well. And then on the right, a vineyard in the Willamette Valley, where you can see there's a lot more leaf growth as well here at this point of time in the season. But again, you see those proximities to the mountainsides and to the river valleys, the river edges, that are really important for moderating all of our vineyards and really keeping the high quality, crisp fruit, ripe fruit profiles, so that we can make high quality wines. This is Del Rio Vineyard in the Rogue Valley as well. You don't see it here, but this is quite a steep site, and it really spans up. So starting at the highway, which is still at about 1,400, 1,500 feet elevation, and then goes up to about 1,800 feet elevation. This site makes some of my favorite Chardonnay as well, and a fantastic sparkling Chardonnay also. Okay, I've done this in just over an hour. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me at any time. My email is bree@oregonwine.org. David is putting some information in there about Oregon Wine Month Toolkit. David, do you want to say a quick wrap up? Thanks everyone for joining today. I appreciate your questions and hope you join me for the regional reds.
Yeah, great job, Bree. Certainly a lot of white wine going on in Oregon. It's great to see all the diversity and all the options.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did throw in a link to our toolkit, which has everything Oregon Wine Month, including the recordings and the way to register for the upcoming webinars that will be happening in May. So go there for all sorts of good stuff, Oregon Wine Month. This resource studio is where you can find presentations and educational resources similar to what Bree was showing up on the screen. So that's available for you as well. And we look forward to hosting you here in May. Maybe it'll be a little bit more sunny here in Oregon. We appreciate everybody's time and attention and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.